Here's Tom.
Hey there.
Morning.
Hey, Carl. How are things?
So I read the book over again. I read the chapter over again.
Oh, yeah?
It's a little challenging, but it's there.
Yeah.
He's very, very erudite.
Well, yeah, this guy's is a very good writer. He's makes you think a little bit, I guess. Trying to find my.
It's disconcerting that the Pakistanis, that guy that killed the 11 was his name.
Yeah.
Then free. After he's convicted.
Yeah, well, the Pakistani, I guess Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones that mostly have most of the radical Islamic people there. So this is where you see all this stuff.
Yeah, when I was going for my change of duty orders in 1986, the detailer wanted me to go to Pakistan. One of the choices, besides going to Newfoundland.
Yeah.
So I took sea duty instead because I figured I was going to be selling weapons to the Mujahideen.
Yeah. So you didn't go, I guess.
One thing I could think the supply officer would want to go to Pakistan for.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. It's yeah, I've never been to that part of the world, so I don't even know what it's like. But
been there by the ocean, but I never went ashore.
Oh yeah.
There's still the Pacific. Ever seen a ship, big ship pulled alongside of us on a supply ship. The ship had was nothing but goats, sheep from Australia, live goats, live sheep. Headed toward the Aden Gulf. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I'm sorry. I was just checking to see if anybody else was checking in. There's Karen. Good morning, Karen.
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm good.
Happy Palm Sunday.
Happy Palm Sunday to you. Thank you for bringing the palms by.
I know. Thanks so much.
We didn't quite get that far down the beach yesterday.
I know. Mine are in the back of my picture there. Do you see them on the wall?
Oh, I do. That's very nice. Well, Ellen put ours in a Corona bottle just for
I'm Tom. I've pretty much had coronavirus up to my neck right now.
That's not even always
With
my
a
favorite service.
with a line.
with a lime. There you go. Palms with a lime. That's not. I like that. It looks like that reminds me of that old. Remember the Laugh-In show where the guy would come out from behind the shrub and dressed like a German soldier. Anyway, that's a long time ago to a galaxy far, far away.
It was a long time ago. Absolutely, it was.
He's in crossword puzzles.
Oh yeah.
Karen, I'm using my inferior wrap thing on my bowl. Gee, I wish I had a nicer one.
I didn't mean to insult your bowl, except that I have to admire mine a little more. That's all.
That's just because yours is better. I mean, you know.
I have
We got that at a craft show somewhere.
I know. I need to learn to make those. Hey, Maggie.
Hi, Maggie.
I have a sister-in-law who's a quilter, and she's making John Ford, and she's making masks for everybody down there.
Yeah, I have a friend that's made 100.
Wow.
I know, it's a lot.
Should I go get it? No. I made one for Gideon. I made one for my friend in California, mailed it off to her, and you know.
Wow.
Yeah. They're pretty easy. I can't see Maggie. Maggie.
Can't see me?
Oh, there you are.
Yeah.
Oh, there you are. You have to talk to see. Hi.
There you are. Good morning.
You have to talk or move, I guess.
Yeah,
There you go. There you go.
There you go. Hey, how's Ellen? How's Liz? Ellen, how's Liz?
I haven't talked to her this morning, so I'm waiting for a morning hey, but that's okay.
Good. She's in.
She was fine playing with the dog, watching wrestling, you know.
No
Good.
baby yet.
No baby yet.
She
She's
went
in
on
my
a long.
prayer.
She went on a long walk. What was that, Friday? And got some cramps, and so we thought, oh, maybe this weekend, maybe this will be it, you know. But not yet.
These babies do what they want to do.
That's
Figure those wrestlers must be getting tested before they wrestle.
Yeah, I think boys are always late, is what I hear.
Well, again, I have to have the one that is against that. Kyle was a day early.
wow.
My
What a
24 hours later. Oh.
Just gotta wait a little bit. Wait another minute or so. See if Bev pops up here because she said she was going to join us. So.
Okay.
We're doing the 40-minute thing. Is that what we're doing?
Well, we did that, but then last week they waived it. So I kind of it popped up right in the middle of it. They said they're waiving it for educators, the 40-minute limit, but I don't know if I qualify.
Mr. Educator. Hey, we had a step visit too on my thumb. Boy, did that help my thumb. I was so relieved.
This is called this is telemedicine here.
I just popped. I mean, it was so sore, but look at it now. It's like flat. I mean, it's not was. It the
looks better than last night.
What poured out of it? Yes.
Yeah, we made
So home surgeries are.
I have two neighborhood patients now. This is pretty good with no license.
Wait till we get Bill.
Careful, you might get some more.
Yeah, I know.
I still have my license. That's okay. I did my own surgery. I just wanted a consult.
Yeah.
It just hurt.
I'm starting to wish I had waited to eat breakfast. I just finished eating breakfast, people.
Oh, okay. No more of that. Well, let's get started in case they do enforce the 40-minute rule. If Bev joins or Jim or anybody else pops in, we'll be glad for that. Let's open with the in the last book we did about Islam. There was a brief little blurb in there about St. Francis of Assisi and how during his lifetime he actually crossed lines during the Crusades and met with the Muslim sultans and tried to come to broker some sort of peace between the warring Christians and Muslims during the Crusades, and then in the 1980s, Pope John Paul II had a World Day of Prayer for Peace that was at Assisi, so I guess I thought we'd open up with the Peace Prayer of St. Francis. I don't know if anybody's that familiar with that, but it's a very nice little prayer. And the purpose of really reading these books about comparative religions, I think, is to try to come to some kind of understanding and reach some sort of peaceful coexistence with other folks, other religions. But so this is the Peace Prayer of St. Francis. It says, "Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me so love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born again to eternal life. In the Lord's name we pray, amen." So I really like that. I used to have a plaque of that somewhere that I think my mother gave me when I was like 15. Hey, Bev.
Hello, I'm sorry. Like a dummy, I tried to come in with my laptop, and of course I had to rejoin the whole thing. So I'm sorry I'm late.
Oh, that's right. You just missed the opening prayer, but it's one we've done before, the St. Francis prayer. So, and I said Jim's got something popped up with Jim's name on it, but I don't see Jim, so I don't know if he's got. Are you there, Jim?
Yes.
Oh, good. I don't see your video's not working, but you're there. Your voice is there, so that's good. Let's start with this Reza Aslan's book. I don't know how many of y'all were able to get the book this week or actually read it, but does anybody have any sort of opening just impressions of the author or how he's writing or anything like that?
Very knowledgeable, detailed.
Yeah. He's an interesting guy because he moved here from Iran as a child at the time of the Iranian hostage crisis, and then his parents. He basically came from an agnostic home. They just didn't want to identify as Muslims. They just wanted to leave all that behind. So he kind of grew up, as a teenager, without religion in the home. And then with his high school buddies, he started going to Christian summer camps. He wound up converting to Christianity. I'm not sure what denomination he joined, but then when he went to college, he started studying comparative religions, started learning more about Islam, and converted back to Islam. So he's a man with really a deep background in the monotheistic faiths, and so he's a very interesting guy. Our class in Lynchburg did a book 10 years or so ago called Zealot, which is a study of the life of Jesus, which is kind of interesting to have a book about Jesus written by a Muslim. But it's a very interesting book and a very thought-provoking book. And I have not read this whole thing, but as we're getting into it, I think it's going to be, hey, Bobby.
Good morning.
Good morning. Haven't missed a whole lot yet. We're just talking about the general impressions of the book. If anybody has any kind of thoughts before we get really started talking about the first chapter or so. Not really. Well, I set out, the whole the subtitle of this book is it's called Confronting Religious Extremism in the Age of Globalization. So he starts out talking about 9/11 and the fringe Muslim groups, but he gets into, I think he's going to get into sort of the next chapter is about Israel, and he gets into some of the other religions and how fundamentalism within those religions is somewhat of a problem as well. But I think it's important to understand this whole book is to sort of understand this concept of globalization. And I sent those two little links. One was to the Thomas Friedman. Has anybody read any of Thomas Friedman's books, the Lexus and the Olive Tree, or The World is Flat, or any of those?
I've read The World is Flat. The World is Flat. I've read that. Yeah,
I just ordered a copy of that. That looks like a pretty interesting. But I watched one of his videos on that, and we'll talk about that in a second. But he's a very good writer. He's an op-ed person for the New York Times, and really started writing about globalization in the 1990s. That first book, the Lexus and the Olive Tree, really talks about sort of the two different worlds that are kind of clashing. The world of this over mechanized, overproduction, kind of symbolized by a luxury car, and then the people that are still going out and by hand tending to olive trees and picking olives. And so you have these, this world is so disparate in everything really. But he talks about three phases in that little clip that I sent around. He talks about the three phases of globalization. First being from 1492 when Columbus realized the world was round, up until about 1800. And it's the interesting thing about that time. That was a time of colonialism. We talked a little bit about this with the last book, but where you sort of met the rest of the world, identifying yourself with your country. So in other words, your country. The British were colonizing India. French were colonizing parts of Africa. And Belgians were the same thing. So the world was getting smaller, but because the countries were expanding. He then talks about the second phase, which would have been the early 1800s to around 2000, and that was more of an economic globalization where you sort of met the world through companies. You had internet companies looking for international markets, as well as for cheap labor, as well as for lots of things but again, the world grew smaller as these countries, as their reach went all the way around the globe rather than just local. He then talks about the third phase of globalization, which was 2000 to present, and of course the big movement with that is the communications. Just from what we're doing here today, we just have the ability to communicate with it. We're all in different parts of this little area here, but somebody from, you know, Virginia could sign in, somebody from Europe could sign in. You know, it's just, we're all neighbors now. And he says the interesting thing about that is that the mechanism of seeing the world and meeting the world is really through individuals and small groups. So we went from a phase of through country expansions and colonization, and then through sort of economic globalization with international countries and international companies and commerce, and now we're at a stage through communication where we're all neighbors. You can see here, you know, a lot of times you call for tech support on your computer or something, and you're talking to somebody in Bombay. You know, it's just really pretty amazing. So anyway, so I think that concept of globalization is really important to understand where Reza Aslan is coming from, especially in this first chapter. The other article I sent around was just kind of serendipitous. I found it this week, but it was about how the coronavirus. It was an op-ed piece in the Washington Post, but how the coronavirus shows us the perils as well as the promise of globalization. So you know, there's a lot of benefits to globalization, but as we've seen with this pandemic, there's also some downsides. And just one quote from that article, it says, instantaneous communication, cheap goods, stock profits, easy travel, and U.S. military supremacy seemed, for a while at least, like fundamental rights or freedoms. But shadowing this taken for granted globalization was a darker reality. Islamist militant blowback, market volatility, rampaging inequality, winner-take-all ethics, a global electronic disinformation system, and a warming planet. So this globalization has good aspects, but it also has a lot of negative aspects, one of which is we're going to talk about with this book. Then the other part about that article, it was really interesting. I was not that familiar with Wendell Willkie. I obviously heard the name and knew he ran for president, but really didn't know a whole lot more about him. But he apparently had this, after World War II, this concept of one world, that he went around and was talking about this. Really was a man sort of about 50 or 60 years ahead of his time. And he argued that the United States should declare a declaration of interdependence, which I thought was kind of interesting. You know, we should become aware of how dependent we are on other people. And we see that in the stock market. I mean, something happens. Well, it happened early on in the coronavirus, where the Chinese markets were closing, and all of a sudden, all the Apple stock and all of our stocks collapsed because the Chinese were having problems. And so, you know, we have all this sort of interdependence with everybody else in the world. And then he concludes that article. I thought this was really interesting. He says, in the long run, maybe this contagion, this COVID-19, will have a silver lining. It might unleash something that Willkie's journey and one world vision could not. A fresh bout of worldwide thinking. Who knows where that might lead? Seeing universal health care or taxes as an investment in all of us, maybe, or a reinvigoration of international law to protect labor rights and environmental standards. How about getting Americans to view the United Nations of the World Health Organization as institutions that are as valuable to our lives as our military? So you know, it's just kind of interesting that, you know, to look at this current predicament, this awful situation that we're in light of this globalization. And it's definitely a result of it. And we can see that, you know, sort of the impaired response to this is, you know, we need more interdependence, obviously, so that we could have worked better together to nip this close. But anyway, so those two, I thought those two articles kind of got us into this first chapter, the introduction and the first chapter of the book. Anybody have any thoughts about the globalization or any of those things we just talked about?
News-wise, there's a line of thought that says the Chinese are using globalization to try to recreate another imperialism, investing in Africa and everything, caveats that they can get access to the resources. It's kind of veiled imperialistic fervor from the Chinese, so we're concerned about that.
Right. And they actually own all of our debt, or a lot of our U.S. debt, right, too. So, you know, it's a little scary to think about that. But anyway, getting into this this book, he starts off by talking, and this is the same sort of note that the last author struck about the us versus them perception of Islam. And he starts out talking about the attacks of 9/11, and that was a little difficult to read, especially that manifesto that they found in the luggage, I guess, of one of the terrorists, where these guys really looked at those horrible acts of 9/11 as religious acts, and they put it in a religious context and used words that made it seem almost like a worship service or it's kind of a scary thing. And Aslan goes on to say, he says, these men were Muslims. They happened to be Muslims, which they read the Quran and assured themselves that they were fighting the allies of Satan, and they were fighting what he calls a cosmic war. And this cosmic war term, Aslan didn't make that up. That somebody else came up with that term. But there are such things as religious wars over history where people are at war with just different religions fighting each other. So it's an earthly battle between two groups, and we've seen that in the Middle East, even between sects of Muslims, between Shiites and Sunnis, like we talked about before. But certainly we've seen it with the Crusades, and it's just this religious war, and this cosmic war he defines as something different. And it's not really one religion against another religion. It's one group of people who feel that they're in the right and that God is on their side, and everybody that's not one of them is evil and is a disciple of Satan. So it's a different sort of thing. It's not a religion against religion. It's a religion against everybody else. And he says that the cosmic war, that whole line of thinking, turns these people into, but they feel like they're soldiers for God, that they're not terrorists, they're not doing horrible things, they're doing what God wants them to do. And he says the cosmic war really draws sharp distinctions. It's either us, again, it's us or them. It's black versus white. It's good versus evil. It's like Star Wars. All the bad guys have black on, all the good guys have white on.
Right.
And he says the ultimate goal of a cosmic war, again, different from religious war, is to vanquish evil itself, which means that cosmic war is absolute, eternal, unending, and he says it's unwinnable. It never ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we've seen that, right, Bev? Yeah.
Right.
You can't take out the leader if somebody else takes his place.
Right. Yeah. Right. So the interesting thing, he says, he's actually read all of Bin Laden's writings and stuff, and he says if you read the stuff that this man wrote, he never talks about policies or where they're going to set up their headquarters. I mean, it's just that's not their focus. The focus is everything he wrote about was to establish truth and get rid of evil, over and over again. These manifestos were all like that. Very first thing in his book was all, we need to rid the world of evil. It's just this very, very subjective goals that really, like Aslan says here, really can never be reached and never succeed. And on page 8 of the book, he quotes a man named Eric Hoffer, and he said, and I'll quote this, he says, in normal times, a democratic nation is an institutionalized association of more or less free individuals. When its existence is threatened and it has to unify its people and generate in them a spirit of utmost self-sacrifice, the democratic nation must transform itself into something akin to a militant church or a revolutionary party. And I thought that was really interesting. Does anybody have any recollections of right after 9/11? It almost seemed like a religious battle. The country did come together. And you see a little bit of that here too. And the good thing about this is the evil that we're confronting now is really, it's not a person or a group of persons. It's a virus.
I know they had decals that said "United We Stand" with the American flag at that time. Right.
Right, and he, Aslan goes on to quote. He says there's 3 things when you confront an enemy like this, and they say these are not normal times. This is not a normal war, and this is not a normal enemy. And he quotes in the first one, these are not normal times. he quotes Tim LaHaye, who, if you remember, he was the guy, evangelical Christian, that wrote all the Left Behind books.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
and he also, if you live in Lynchburg, there's this giant sign as you drive by Liberty University, it's LaHaye Ice Center. He donated all this. He donates gazillions of dollars to Liberty University, and the Ice Center is a hockey rink that he built because they wanted a hockey team. But anyway, Tim LaHaye was quoted as saying, 9/11 is the focal point of end time events. You know, I don't know if he's plugging books or what. This is not a normal war category. He quotes our president, George W. Bush, at the time. Victory will come only when we rid the world of evil. And I can remember watching some of his press conference where he talked about the evildoers, which is right out of Psalms and a lot of the Old Testament, the evildoers. And he says the victory will not come. And if you think about how Aslan just defined a cosmic war, you can't win a war like this. And this is not a normal enemy. He quoted one of the army generals, and I didn't write down who that was, but it says his name is Satan. Satan wants to destroy us as a nation, and he wants to destroy us as a Christian army. So what happened with that 9/11? So we were attacked by these religious zealots who were fighting this so-called cosmic war. They're not fighting the United States. They're not fighting Western Europe. They're not fighting Roman Catholics or Presbyterians. They're fighting evil. And how did we respond to that? We went right into the same rhetoric that they used to justify what they were doing. And he goes on to say that maybe that's how we justified some of the torture, some of the human rights violations that were done during that time. We're justifying it by we bought into this cosmic war thinking.
Think Guantanamo.
Guantanamo. There's still people. There's still prisoners at Guantanamo, I think.
Never been charged.
Right. So it's just kind of interesting when you start defining these things and realize, and Aslan sort of ends that little part by saying, by adopting this religiously charged rhetoric and cosmic worldview, I like that cosmic worldview of groups like Al Qaeda, by viewing such, we have played into their hands. So we've answered, we've sort of just fallen right into the trap of fighting into this, buying into this cosmic war theory. And what he says we should do, and I think what the theme is going to be throughout the book, is that you have to separate the religious issues, which we're never going to probably solve, and really and look at the underlying sort of world problems, the economic problems, the economic disparities, the disparity in healthcare, all these kinds of things, and fix those, because that's something we can actually do something about. Whereas we really can't fight this rhetoric of I'm fighting evil. How do you talk somebody out of that?
Tom, it strikes me that it's like being in the Old Testament mentality, whereas Jesus brought about a totally different way of dealing with the earth's problems.
That's a great point, and I think the previous book, they made that point about there being 40,000 or so different denominations within Christianity, and there's not that many different types of Islam, but there are different types of Islam. It's not they're not all the same, and the majority of Muslims have, I like that Old Testament versus New Testament kind of thinking. They moved from a real strict interpretation of the Quran and the Hadith, which were the writings about Muhammad, to a more, I don't want to say relaxed, but maybe a less harsh way. But there are still these people, Bin Laden, they represent these really strict, where the capital punishment is still followed. They're still beheading people. They're still cutting off people's hands for stealing in the marketplace. They still follow that, and those people are all located where? They're located in Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and Iran and Iraq. So that it's a small group, but it's unfortunately, with that globalization, where small groups and individuals now have the same power as large nations, really, to communicate and enforce policy, all these things. That's why we're in the situation that we're in with these radicals.
Well, to me, it's like moving from an underlying emotion of punishment to love. In punishment, it was very strict, and if you didn't do it, we'd cut off a hand or stone you or whatever. In the New Testament, Jesus said, love your enemies.
Right. And I think as we go through this book, though, we're going to see that it's not just Islam, that in other religious, traditions, there are people that are still very fundamental, if you want to use that word, but or maybe more Old Testament than New Testament, or very literal rather than being willing to interpret what they're reading. Anyway, so he goes on. The next part of the book, it was really interesting, and I think to me anyway. And he says that he starts it off by making this statement. I just wanted to kind of see what everybody thought of this. Is religion is a stronger, more global force today than it has been in many generations. And I think if you think locally, you say, well, people aren't going to church and this and that and the other. But if you think globally, and he's got the numbers to back it up, more people are by percentage wise, more people are participating and identifying with a certain religion than have been in many, many generations. Anybody have any feelings about that? I that struck me because I would not have said that, just not knowing the data or whatever. I would assume just the opposite, that it was a less religious world now than it was, say, 50, 60 years ago.
But if you think about it, first it was Europe. Their cathedrals are empty. Now it's the US, but in Africa, people are flocking to Christianity. So kind of that shift of religion, practiced religion, seems to be moving from us.
Yeah, and that's what I think. If you look around here locally, and even, you say, well, religion is not as important to people as it used to be. But, again, like you just said, globally, if you throw in, Africa and Europe, Eastern Europe anyway, religion is very important. And he kind of went through a few paragraphs of, well, why is that? What precipitated this shift? And he's talked about, and we talked about this in the last book about the Age of Enlightenment, late 1700s, early 1800s, and people like Thomas Jefferson and in the U.S. and all these other Enlightenment thinkers. And really, people went away from religion to explain natural phenomena and this and that, and relied more on science and investigation and mathematics. So there was a shift away from religious explanations for things, and of course we were now able to figure out natural reasons to explain a lot of things. And that rose with that arose this whole national secularism. In other words, you would identify yourself as, I'm an American, I'm a Frenchman, I'm British. You identify yourself by your nationality rather so much than your religion. And then we, in the 1900s, 20th century, what happens is you have all this nationalism that led to these awful atrocities. You had fascism with the Nazis and what they did to the Jewish people. Maoism, what they did to in China. Stalinism, how many millions of people were killed under Stalin? And he mentions even socialism and Darwinism. So he says, his national secularism, this identity being your nationality, kind of arose as people became sort of disillusioned with religion. So they kind of lost their religious identity and formed more of a national identity. And then with all these atrocities and things, and also with the globalization, people are now relating more to whatever their religious identity is, more so than their national identity. And he kind of finishes that section by talking about again, how globalization has changed the way people I think of their own identity. So, you know, I mean, when I was growing up, I was a little kid in Arlington, Virginia. I was and that was my world, and I didn't know any much else. I didn't, even when the race stuff started, there weren't any black people who lived around. It just, it was a different world. Whereas now it's, you're just as liable to live next to, not here, but back in the cities we all came from, you're just as likely to live next door to a Muslim or a Hindu or or whatever, as you are to live next door to somebody exactly like yourself. So this globalization has kind of forced people into thinking about themselves in terms of their religion. And Aslan goes on to say that in a world where religion and politics are increasingly sharing the same vocabulary and functioning in the same sphere, one could argue that religious grievances are no less valid than political grievances, and religious violence no less rational than political violence. And he goes on to say these cosmic wars that we defined earlier in the hour really a lot of times are political wars, but they get parsed in this language that makes them seem like a cosmic war, and we're just as guilty of that, using that language as honestly as the radical Islamists are, for whatever reason. And he kind of concludes this first chapter with we must strip the conflicts of our world of their religious connotations. We must reject the religiously polarizing rhetoric of our leaders and of our enemies. We must focus on the material matters at stake. We must seek to address the earthly issues that always lie behind the cosmic impulse. So he says, even though these people have convinced themselves that they're fighting evil, and evil is a very, what is it? There are really definite problems, and he gets into that in the next chapter where he talks about Palestinians really are suffering at the hands of Israelis, and that Muslims do feel imposed upon in their native countries with all of these leaders that have been propped up by the West, and borders that were drawn sort of serendipitously after world wars and things like that. So I think as we move through this book, we're going to see where we're going to try to remove the religious rhetoric and tones and move on towards figuring out what the actual underlying political and economic reasons are for these conflicts. Anyway, that's all I got. Let's have some discussion. What do you think about all this? Is this worth spending the next 4 or 5 weeks on, or no?
I think so.
And I've never read the book, so it's great.
Well, yeah, we try to make it so you don't have to read the book. I mean, I like to read, so I like to read the books, but we try to put the data out there and then try to generate some discussion from that. I thought it was fascinating, really, the rhetoric. I do remember hearing George W. Bush talking about evildoers. I think they even made fun of him on like Saturday Night Live and stuff for talking about evildoers, because that was one of his little catchphrases. But I never thought of it. I never really realized that was such a term from the Old Testament until we did our book on the Psalms earlier on, and it's all through the Psalms about evildoers.
Right.
And so that this language really was responding to this cosmic quality, if you will, of the terrorist attacks of 9/11.
Well, he really was, said he was a fundamentalist, and it was kind of what saved his life from alcoholism. So
Right.
I sort of understood where he came from, but I was surprised that he brought it kind of into the political rhetoric as president of the country, that we would look at it as this cosmic, war.
Right.
I guess that's how he saw it. I just thought about it superficially, that it was him, but he really believed it.
Right. And so do these other
Yes.
folks that they're quoting in the book. And I'm sure there's probably thousands more quotes like that from different people from that time period. Not so much now. I don't really hear that rhetoric, maybe because it's not, we got so much else going on, but even before this COVID-19 stuff, I don't remember this kind of language being used, all these religious undertones. Maybe it's because we've gotten rid of bin Laden and it's not on the forefront of everybody's mind anymore, or whatever. That it's not.
But Karen, aren't there even some of our own like ladies that kind of think of this as end of time and God's punishment or something?
I think that could be very possible, Bev. I've just talked to a few people that are frightened to death about what's going on, and I'm
Right.
not really. I mean, I'm not scared, but
I'm with you. I mean, truly thinking of this as an end time and in a very scary kind of a way. I mean, I think there are some people that we know that are thinking that.
Yeah, I'm
Well,
sure
I've
there's
seen
a
it-
few people.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead, Tom.
Oh no, I have seen a couple of things, just going through Facebook and watching CNN, and looking online, where people have talked about, well, this whole COVID-19 virus is God's punishment because we're destroying the planet, or whatever your cause is. This is God's punishment because we're doing abortions. This is God's punishment because the prayer's not in schools. This is God's punishment because whatever your particular cause is. And you just can't, again, using the words of this author, you have to separate the religious kind of situation with the physical. And this is a mutant virus. This is what viruses do. This is not, God didn't do this. This is, but it's interesting. Again, the religious rhetoric takes over.
But what you say, Tom, is some people truly believe that. And so it isn't just rhetoric. What are they going to turn around and do? That's kind of the scary part, because, that's kind of the 9/11. You get desperate enough, you do something. And
well, and you see, people shoot abortion doctors, and they just, stuff like this happens. Violence happens, and I guess people can get carried away with whatever their thoughts are. Apparently, they're not enforcing their 40-minute rule again either, because it's a little bit past 40 minutes, and we're still talking. So that's good.
Thank you,
Bobby,
Ryan.
you've been pretty quiet, Bobby. Do you have any thoughts about this, or?
I find it very interesting, and when you talk about the way the dynamics of not going to church, you can't leave out the fact that young families are busy on the weekends now with sports that we didn't do back in our day. We had the blue law. You didn't have stores open on Sunday. I find it very interesting that the 9/11 attack wasn't really against Americans. It was against those that didn't believe in Islam. That were
Or
all
their
there.
version of Islam. Yeah.
Right. Well, it's not, like you said, they weren't after the Presbyterians, the Catholics. They were against anybody who wasn't one of them.
Exactly.
So I'm learning a lot here, Tom. I've really enjoyed these last 2 weeks and appreciate the time you've put into it to make it so good.
Oh, I appreciate that. I do this mostly for selfish reasons, because I want to learn about this stuff myself, but I do enjoy getting together with everybody and talking about these things, though. So
You know what they say, the best student is the teacher.
yeah.
he knows the most. You're right, Bobby.
Well, it makes you go out and look at a lot of different things.
And Bob and I are always choir, so we never get to come to Sunday school.
Right. Well, now that I found the Zoom thing, we can record this. And so what I'm thinking is, even when we get back to having class in the church on Sunday morning, maybe we can bring a laptop and record it. Or if like Jim, when you're out of town, you could call in on Zoom, and we'd have the Zoom set up in our class, and then we could record it, and the choir could, if they really were interested, could look at it at another time.
And maybe send us feedback, like the Karens of the world, you guys, Bobby, people who are in choir could listen and then send their questions for the next week. So we kind of keep the conversation going.
Right.
I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Jim, you've been,
forgotten
Jim,
how
are you
much
still
I-
there?
Yeah, I'm still
I
here.
missed some.
I'd like to mention the positive side of the shutdown. Look at
Okay.
us. We're still together, and we've got folks, Bobby and Sharon, who have not been able to be with us since we started. And there are others. And I think we can use this opportunity to reach out, as you said, Tom, and include others in some way. And maybe by next week, I will have my video working. But it's
Well, we
just
missed it.
sports.
We missed
But
seeing you, Jim.
it's not just our group. Look around and see how many good deeds are being done for many people, most of which are not recognized. But we
Right. Right, Jim.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to go and see, when all this is said and done. That's the thing you have to keep focused on. I woke up, I don't remember what, there was actually an op-ed thing in the Coastland Times about whether we should open a pro and con, or whether we should open the bridges to the non-resident property owners. And the one guy said, you let all this disease in, blah, 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 blah. And the other guy says, well, they're going to come back sooner or later, and they're going to come back with the disease, and we're going to get it. Why don't we just get it now? It was like, oh my God, and so I kind of didn't sleep much that night after reading that. And it's like, I don't know what the right thing. I think the right thing to do is what we're doing. But one thing you have to focus on, and the way I got myself through that little crisis was, it's going to end. I mean, we're going to have a vaccine. We're going to have some kind of medication that will treat it. It might not be next week. It might not be next month. It might be this summer sometime. But we'll have, this will go away. That doesn't mean there won't be another one next year or the year after. We were talking about this the other day. It's like hurricanes. Down here, you can go, 5 years without a major storm, and you get 3 of them in one summer. And then unfortunately, these viruses are like that too. We haven't seen one this bad in, probably 100 years. And there may be another one next year. You just don't know. They're mutant. Who knows? So I think the other positive thing, Jim, that'll come out of this is hopefully this global thinking. Hopefully there will be some sort of global response. I mean, look what's happening now. China sent ventilators to New York City. The state of Washington sent masks to Detroit or something. I mean, this is where we have to get to. After this is what we need to learn, is that we can't do it all by ourselves. And this declaration of interdependence, maybe is something that Wendell Willkie, maybe this is something that maybe will happen.
There's areas of the world where generationally, beyond the messianic things that are going on, globalization, like in the Balkans, during the Balkans War, I read a book, a real small book. I somehow read it to somebody who don't have it anymore. Talked about problems in the Balkans where there were people trying to annihilate people, the Serbians. And you look at those countries, Yugoslavia was an amalgamation of different countries. They all had Christians and Muslims in their own country. But those people remembered that when the Ottoman Turks took over and they were repulsed by the people of Croatia, they remembered the fact that these people committed atrocities, like 200,000 people were killed at one time on each side. So that's why the place is so complicated. But there are places where still hatred generation from people that just on the Judeo-Christian side, the Muslim side, isolated in that area.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. So hopefully we come to some better methods of dealing with things than that. But well, let's close so that we can switch over to the church website and watch Jody and try to keep some kind of routine going here. Would anyone like to close us in prayer? No volunteers? Well, I'll do it then. Let's pray. Dear God, thank you for being with us through these past few weeks, and thank you for being with us always. Thank you for this beautiful day. Thank you that we can still get outside and enjoy your creation, even though we need to be 6 feet apart. Thank you for all the innovative things that people are doing to try to keep us all connected. Thank you for the people that are putting their lives at risk to treat this disease and to try to help us limit the damage from it. Please be with those families who have loved ones who are sick in the hospital. Please be with those people in the hospital and remind them that you are with them as well. thank you for this opportunity to gather in a different and new way, and that we are able to use this technology to hopefully better understand your word and your directions as to how we should live our lives. And all this we give great gratitude, and in Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right.
Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you all very much, and we will see you next week. I'm kind of working on a book club, and if I get that set up, I will send that out this week. There's a website called goodreads.com, and you can set up a virtual book club. So I'm going to work on that maybe today or tomorrow, and see if I can put some books on there. You can actually vote on what books you want to do. So if we get enough people to sign up over the next week or 10 days, and then maybe vote on a book. And I want it to be like fiction. I want it to be more discussion, rather than a nonfiction book like this. Just have some kind of a book that has some kind of moral themes or something like that. But we'll figure that out and get that out.
Tom, if anybody wants the book, this little book club that sent me a book last week, they mail everything free. There's no postage charge.
Oh, good.
So if you all let me know any books that you want, or I can just send everybody the website, you can call them up. My book got here in a week, and it was $4.18 and no shipping charge.
Oh, was that a local bookstore? Or?
No, I went through the local bookstore. They were closing that day even to outside orders. But I found this one online, and I like to support a little bookstore.
Yeah.
And these guys are doing it. They're trying to stay alive against the Amazon. So.
Well, yeah, it'd be good. Why don't you send it next time you send out an email, blast emails? Why don't you just add that into the email? That'd be great.
Okay, I'll do it. Great. Thank you.
All right. Well, you all take care and stay safe. And
See ya.
stay
Bye.
home.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Bye, Rev.